At 20, the nun shot the mountain man dead, and the sheriff who arrested her fell in love that night. The town of Willow Creek was small, quiet, and tucked deep into the mountains. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and strangers were always noticed immediately. The houses were mostly wooden, built many decades ago, with smoke curling from the chimneys in the early mornings. The streets were narrow and winding, and during winter snow would cover them in a thick white blanket that made traveling difficult. Life in Willow Creek moved slowly. People worked hard, but they valued peace and simplicity above all else. There were no big stores, no cinemas, and no fancy restaurants. Instead, the town had a small general store, a church with a tall steeple, and a sheriff's office where Sheriff Ethan Cole worked. Sheriff Ethan was a man who had spent most of his adult life in Willow Creek. He was in his early 30s, tall and strong, but there was a calmness about him that people respected. His job was to keep the town safe, but since Willow Creek was quiet, he didn't have many emergencies. Most days his work involved small tasks, helping a neighbor find a lost cow, mediating arguments over property lines, or checking on the elderly to make sure they had everything they needed. Despite his respected position, Ethan often felt lonely. His work kept him busy, but it did not fill the emptiness he sometimes felt in his personal life. He longed for something meaningful, someone who could understand him beyond his badge and uniform. On the outskirts of the town, the mountains rose sharply. They were dense with trees, streams, and hidden paths. Deep within these mountains lived a man whom the townsfolk called the Mountain Man. He had lived there for years, far from everyone else. No one knew much about him, and the few who had seen him described him as large, rugged, and quiet. He was a mystery. Some people feared him, believing he was dangerous or unpredictable. Others were simply curious. Rumors about the Mountain Man traveled fast in a small town like Willow Creek. Some said he lived alone because he wanted to avoid trouble. Others whispered about strange things he supposedly did in the woods. But no one really knew for sure, and that only made the stories more thrilling and frightening. At 20 years old, Sister Mary Ann arrived in Willow Creek. She was young, gentle, and full of determination. She had grown up in a different town, but had always felt a calling to help others. Joining the convent had been the most important decision of her life. Her days were filled with study, prayer, and helping the sick and elderly. Sister Mary Ann's life in the convent was quiet and disciplined. She wore the traditional habit, which covered her from head to toe, and her hair was neatly tucked away. She spoke softly, always choosing her words carefully. Despite her gentle nature, there was a quiet strength in her. People who met her could feel that she was brave, honest, and not easily frightened. Mary Ann had been in Willow Creek for only a few weeks, and she was still learning the rhythm of the town. She enjoyed walking through the streets, greeting the locals and helping in the small ways she could. She delivered food to those who were sick, assisted in the little church services, and helped care for children at the convent school. The townsfolk were kind to her, though some were curious about why a young nun had come to their remote town. Mary Ann never shared too much about her past. She preferred to focus on helping others and fulfilling her duties. She had dreams of making a difference, even in small ways, and she believed that every act of kindness mattered. One chilly morning, as the first rays of sunlight touched the snowy peaks of the mountains, Mary Ann set out on a walk beyond the town. She carried a small basket for collecting herbs that were needed for the convent's infirmary. Her steps were careful on the icy paths, and the cold wind nipped at her cheeks. She walked quietly, listening to the soft sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, and the gentle murmur of a nearby stream. The mountains were beautiful, but there was also a sense of mystery in the way the trees cast shadows and the paths wound unpredictably. Marianne loved the peace of nature, but she also felt a slight tension, a sense that she was entering a world far different from the safety of the convent. As she walked, she thought about the people in Willow Creek. She thought about how she could help the sick woman who lived on the edge of town, the elderly man who struggled with his garden, and the children who loved to hear stories. She loved these small moments of connection. But as she ventured further into the mountains, she knew she had to be careful. The stories of the mountain man lingered in her mind, though she had never seen him herself. She had heard how people were afraid to cross his path, and she wondered if he was truly dangerous or just misunderstood. Still, her faith and her sense of duty gave her courage. She believed that fear should not prevent her from helping others or doing what was right. Meanwhile, Sheriff Ethan was starting his day at the office. He checked the small notice board, went through his paperwork, and greeted the townsfolk who stopped by with questions or concerns. He thought about his own life and the routines that had become so familiar over the years. While he respected his work, he couldn't help but feel that life had more to offer than reports, patrols, and solving small-town disputes. Sometimes he longed for an adventure, a challenge, or even a connection that went beyond the boundaries of his duty. But for now, he focused on his responsibilities, unaware that soon his life would change in ways he could never have imagined.
In the mountains, Marianne continued her search for herbs.
She carefully examined the plants, selecting the ones that were safe and useful. She paused often to enjoy the beauty around her, the sunlight filtering through the trees, the sound of the wind through the branches, and the sense of solitude that came from being surrounded by nature. At the same time, she remained alert. She knew that the mountains were wild, unpredictable, and sometimes dangerous, but she trusted herself, her instincts, and her faith. She believed that courage and preparation could guide her safely through the unknown. The morning paths slowly, with Marianne making steady progress along the mountain paths. She felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment, knowing that her small actions would help others back at the convent. But as she ventured deeper, the forest grew denser, the shadows longer, and the sense of isolation stronger. Every sound seemed amplified. The snap of a branch underfoot, the rustle of leaves, even the distant cry of a bird. While part of her felt awe at the beauty and mystery of the wilderness, another part of her felt a quiet tension. Something was waiting in the mountains, something unseen but palpable, that made her heart beat faster and her senses sharpen. By midday, Marianne had gathered a large collection of herbs. Her basket was full, and her task was nearly complete. She turned to head back, retracing her steps through the winding paths. The forest seemed different now, more shadowed, more alive with subtle movements. She noticed how the sunlight danced through the trees, how the snow melted into tiny streams, and how the air carried the faint scent of pine and earth. Every step reminded her of the delicate balance between beauty and danger in the mountains. She knew she had to be cautious, but she also felt a quiet thrill at the adventure, the sense of walking where few people had dared to go. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Marianne reached a small clearing. She paused to rest and take in the view. From this point, she could see the entire valley below. The town of Willow Creek nestled among the trees, smoke rising from chimneys, and the distant peaks shimmering in the sunlight. She felt a sense of peace and accomplishment, proud of her courage and determination. But even in this moment of calm, she felt a shiver of anticipation. The mountains held secrets, and she was about to encounter one that would change her life forever. The mountain air was colder now as the day wore on, and Sister Marianne could feel the chill creeping into her bones. The forest around her had grown quiet, except for the occasional rustle of a bird or the whisper of the wind through the trees. She moved carefully, her basket still full of herbs, keeping her eyes on the path ahead. Every step she took reminded her that the mountains were beautiful, but they were also unpredictable. She trusted her instincts, but there was an uneasy feeling in the back of her mind, a sense that she was not entirely alone. As she rounded a bend in the narrow path, she noticed something unusual. Tracks in the soft earth suggested that someone, or something, had been there recently. The footprints were large and deep, not like the light steps of a hiker or the delicate prints of an animal. Marianne's heart began to beat faster. She was no stranger to nature, but these signs made her cautious. She paused, listening carefully, trying to detect any sound that might explain the footprints. The forest was quiet, yet somehow alive, as if it were holding its breath. Suddenly, a shadow moved among the trees. Marianne froze, her hand gripping the handle of her basket. She could see the outline of a man, tall and broad, moving silently but deliberately. His hair was dark and wild, and his clothing was worn from years in the mountains. The mountain man had appeared in the clearing, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Marianne felt a mix of fear and curiosity. She had heard the stories, but seeing him in person made them real. He was not like anyone she had met before. His presence was powerful, commanding attention even without words. The mountain man studied her carefully. His eyes were sharp, and his expression was unreadable. Marianne felt a shiver of nervousness. She knew she had to remain calm, but her mind raced with questions. Why was he here? Did he mean to harm her, or was he simply curious about the stranger in his mountains? She remembered the lessons of her faith. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the strength to act rightly despite it. Taking a slow, steadying breath, she spoke softly, introducing herself and explaining that she meant no harm. Her words seemed to catch the mountain man by surprise. He paused, tilting his head as if listening not only to what she said but to the tone of her voice, the confidence in her calmness. Marianne continued, explaining that she was collecting herbs for the convent's infirmary and that she had no intention of disturbing him. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly in her basket. She hoped that her explanation would be enough, that her honesty and courage would prevent any misunderstanding. The mountain man took a cautious step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Marianne could see the roughness of his hands, the lines on his face, and the strength in his posture. Despite his intimidating appearance, there was a sense of thoughtfulness in the way he moved. He did not speak immediately, but his silence was not threatening. Marianne sensed that he was trying to understand her, to measure her intentions and the sincerity in her words. She realized that fear alone would not solve the situation. She had to be careful, respectful, and confident. Suddenly, a branch snapped underfoot, startling both of them. Marianne's heart leapt into her throat. She took a small step back, clutching her basket tighter. The mountain man's expression shifted slightly, and Marianne noticed that his eyes flicked toward the sound, alert and focused. For a moment, the tension in the clearing was almost tangible, like a thin thread stretching to its limit. Marianne knew that any wrong move could escalate the situation, so she remained still, letting her presence be calm and non-threatening. The mountain man finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate. He asked why she had come into the mountains, questioning her purpose and her presence. Marianne explained again, emphasizing that she was only there to help the sick and the elderly at her convent. She told him about the herbs, about her desire to care for others, and about the peaceful life she led. Her words were simple, honest, and full of intention. She hoped that the sincerity in her voice would reach him, that he would see that she was not an intruder in the sense of causing harm. For a few moments, the mountain man remained silent. He watched her carefully, considering her explanation. Marianne noticed that he was not as aggressive as the stories had suggested. There was thoughtfulness in his eyes, even a hint of curiosity. She realized that people often feared what they did not understand, and that courage sometimes meant showing respect while standing firm in one's own truth. She took a deep breath and tried to convey through her words and body language that she was not a threat. Just as Marianne began to feel a small sense of relief, the mountain man moved suddenly, stepping closer in a way that startled her. She instinctively took a step back, clutching her basket and looking for a safe space to retreat. Her heart raced, but she kept her voice calm and steady. She explained once more that she had no intention of harming him, that she was only there to gather herbs for healing purposes. Her tone was respectful, yet firm, showing that she would not run or act out of fear. The mountain man paused, his eyes studying her carefully. Marianne noticed a change in his expression, curiosity mixed with caution. He seemed to be weighing his options, considering whether she was honest or hiding something. Marianne continued to speak softly, explaining her role in the convent, the work she did to help others, and her respect for nature and the mountains. She hoped that by sharing her intentions clearly and calmly, she could prevent any misunderstanding and diffuse the tension. Time seemed to stretch in the clearing. The forest around them remained still, as if watching the encounter. Marianne felt the weight of the moment, the delicate balance between fear, courage, and understanding. She realized that every word, every movement, and every choice mattered. She could not rely on luck alone. She had to remain thoughtful, respectful, and brave. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she focused on the truth of her purpose, the sincerity of her words, and the calmness of her presence. The mountain man finally relaxed slightly, stepping back and lowering his gaze. Marianne breathed a quiet sigh of relief, feeling a mixture of triumph and lingering tension. She knew that she had navigated a delicate situation with care, honesty, and courage. At the same time, she understood that the mountains were full of unknowns, and that life in this remote place could change in an instant. She took a slow step backward, preparing to leave the clearing and return to the safety of the paths she knew. As Marianne began to walk away, she felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was relief that the encounter had not escalated, curiosity about the mountain man, and a quiet admiration for the strength and wisdom she had discovered within herself. She realized that courage was not only about facing danger, but also about understanding, communication, and respect. Her steps were careful but confident as she moved down the path, her basket full of herbs and her heart full of reflection. By the time Marianne reached a safer part of the mountain, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon. The forest was bathed in warm golden light, and the shadows stretched long across the paths. She felt the exhaustion from her long day, but also a sense of accomplishment. She had faced the unknown, maintained her courage, and honored her purpose. The encounter with the mountain man would stay with her, a reminder of the unexpected challenges and lessons that life could bring. As she descended toward the town, Marianne thought about the stories she had heard and the reality she had experienced. She realized that courage, honesty, and respect could change the course of a tense moment. She felt a quiet gratitude for the inner strength she had discovered and a deeper appreciation for the complexities of life in the mountains. The day had tested her in ways she had not expected, and she knew that her journey was far from over. By the time Sister Marianne reached the lower slopes of the mountain, the sun was beginning its slow descent behind the tall peaks. The forest gradually gave way to the first signs of the town, and she felt a mix of relief and nervousness. Relief because she had survived the tense encounter in the forest, and nervousness because she knew that the stories of the mountain man would follow her back to Willow Creek. Her heart was still racing, and her hands trembled slightly as she carried her basket filled with herbs. She told herself to stay calm, to focus on the task at hand, and to trust that everything would be all right once she reached the safety of the town. However, as she approached the edge of the trees, she noticed someone waiting by the narrow mountain path. It was Sheriff Ethan Cole. He had received a report from a passerby who saw Marianne heading into the mountains, and, knowing the rumors about the mountain man, he had hurried to find her. When he saw her, he immediately noticed the tension in her posture and the nervous glance she cast over her shoulder. Ethan was a calm man, but he had a keen sense for trouble, and this situation clearly seemed serious. "Are you all right, sister?" Ethan called gently as he stepped forward. His voice carried authority but also warmth. Marianne stopped in her tracks, relieved to see a familiar figure from the town. She nodded, managing a small smile. "Yes, Sheriff. I'm fine."
"Thank you for coming." Her voice was soft but carried a hint of lingering tension.
Ethan could see that she had been in the mountains for a while and that something had happened, though he did not yet know the full story. Ethan motioned for Marianne to step aside, speaking in a calm and measured tone. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Was anyone hurt?" Marianne's heart skipped a beat. She knew that she would have to explain the encounter with the mountain man. She had faced him in the mountains, and while she had acted with courage, she had also defended herself in a way that could be misunderstood. Taking a deep breath, she began to recount the events carefully, speaking slowly so that every word was clear. She explained that she had gone into the mountains to collect herbs for the convent's infirmary. She described the forest, the quiet clearing, and how she had seen the mountain man. She told him that he had approached her suddenly, and that though she had been afraid, she had spoken to him respectfully, explaining her purpose. Ethan listened carefully, his eyes never leaving hers. He could see the sincerity in her expression and the truth in her voice. Marianne emphasized that she had meant no harm and that the encounter had ended without serious conflict. Ethan could sense the honesty in her words. He noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, and how her calm voice reflected both courage and fear. He realized that she was not exaggerating or hiding anything. Yet, the seriousness of the situation remained. The mountain man had a reputation in the town, and anyone encountering him in the mountains could find themselves in danger. Ethan's duty as sheriff required him to investigate further to ensure that both Marianne and the mountain man were safe, and that the events were properly documented. "Did he threaten you?" Ethan asked gently, still observing her carefully. Marianne nodded, her face pale. "Yes, Sheriff. He was startled when he saw me. I think he thought I had come to steal from him. I had to stand my ground. I didn't want to hurt him, but I wanted to protect myself." Ethan nodded slowly. He could understand her actions. He knew that courage sometimes required standing firm, even when facing uncertainty or fear. He appreciated her honesty and the careful way she described what had happened. Ethan motioned for Marianne to follow him down the path toward the town. "I need to take you to the office so we can record everything properly," he said. His voice was calm and reassuring. Marianne complied, feeling a mixture of nervousness and gratitude. She knew that the situation could easily be misunderstood by others in the town. At the same time, she felt comforted by Ethan's presence. There was a quiet confidence in the way he led her, a sense that he would protect her and ensure that justice was fair and balanced. As they walked, Ethan kept the conversation light but purposeful. He asked about her work at the convent, about her life before coming to Willow Creek, and about her experiences in the town so far. Marianne spoke softly, sharing details about the people she had helped, the children she taught, and the patients she cared for. Ethan listened attentively, genuinely interested in her experiences and perspectives. In those moments, Marianne noticed a warmth in his eyes, a kindness that went beyond his role as sheriff. She felt a sense of trust developing, a feeling that she could be honest with him without fear of judgment. By the time they reached the edge of town, the sky had turned a soft orange, and the first lights began to glow in the houses. People walked along the streets, returning home from their daily work. The scent of freshly baked bread and smoke from chimneys filled the air. Marianne felt a sense of comfort returning, the familiarity of the town easing the tension she had felt in the mountains. Yet she also knew that the events of the day were extraordinary, and that the encounter with the mountain man would be remembered for some time. At the sheriff's office, Ethan guided Marianne inside and asked her to sit while he prepared the necessary paperwork. The office was small and modest, with wooden desks, shelves of books, and a bulletin board covered with notices. Ethan worked quickly but carefully, recording the details Marianne provided. She answered his questions honestly, recounting the events step by step. Ethan noted her clarity, her sincerity, and the courage she had shown in facing a situation that would have frightened most people. As the interview continued, Marianne felt a strange mix of relief and vulnerability. She was relieved that she had shared the truth and that Ethan believed her. At the same time, she felt vulnerable because the situation was still serious, and she did not know how the town would react. Ethan noticed the subtle shifts in her expression, the slight tension in her shoulders, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, and he offered words of reassurance. "You did what you had to do," he said calmly. "You were honest, and you were careful. That is all anyone can ask." The conversation shifted to practical matters. Ethan explained that he would need to investigate further, speak to witnesses, and ensure that the mountain man's side of the story was heard. Marianne agreed, understanding that fairness required careful attention to detail and transparency. She appreciated Ethan's professionalism and the thoughtful way he balanced duty with compassion. For the first time that day, she felt a sense of safety, knowing that she was not alone and that someone capable and trustworthy was handling the situation. After the paperwork was completed, Ethan escorted Marianne to a quiet room where she could rest. The day had been long, tense, and emotionally exhausting. Marianne sat down, feeling the weight of the events pressing on her shoulders. Ethan remained nearby, not as a figure of authority now, but as someone who understood the unusual circumstances of the day. They spoke quietly about lighter topics, the beauty of the mountains, the work of the convent, and the small joys of Willow Creek life. The conversation allowed Marianne to relax slightly, to regain her composure, and to reflect on the remarkable events she had experienced. As evening settled over Willow Creek, Marianne realized that she was beginning to trust Ethan in a way she had not expected. His calm presence, understanding nature, and thoughtful questions had provided comfort in a time of uncertainty. She appreciated the balance he maintained between duty and kindness, authority and empathy. For his part, Ethan found himself drawn to Marianne's quiet strength, her courage, and the sincere way she carried herself. In the soft glow of the evening, a bond began to form, one built on respect, honesty, and the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. By the time night fell, Marianne had regained her composure enough to think clearly about what had happened. She knew that the events of the day would leave a lasting mark on her life, on the town, and perhaps even on Sheriff Ethan Cole. She felt a quiet gratitude for the lessons she had learned, the importance of courage, honesty, and careful judgment in challenging situations. She also felt a sense of hope, knowing that even in a small, quiet town, human connection could emerge in unexpected ways. As the stars began to twinkle above Willow Creek, Marianne prepared to rest, reflecting on the mountain, the encounter, and the path that lay ahead. She knew that tomorrow would bring questions, investigation, and perhaps further challenges. Yet she also felt a sense of readiness, a quiet confidence in her ability to face whatever came next. And as she looked toward Ethan, sitting quietly nearby, she sensed that the day's extraordinary events had changed more than just her life. They had touched both of them in ways neither could yet fully understand. Night had fully settled over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the quiet streets and the small wooden houses. The town was silent, except for the occasional bark of a dog or the faint sound of wind brushing through the trees. Inside the sheriff's office, a single lamp cast a warm golden glow, illuminating the small room where Sister Mary Ann sat on a wooden chair. She was exhausted, her muscles sore from the long day in the mountains, but her mind refused to rest. Thoughts of the mountain man, the encounter in the forest, and the conversation with Sheriff Ethan kept circling in her mind. She felt a mixture of relief, fear, and curiosity, knowing that the events of the day would stay with her for a long time. Sheriff Ethan remained nearby, sitting quietly at his desk, shuffling through the paperwork from the day's events, but his attention kept drifting toward Mary Ann. He noticed the way her hands rested nervously in her lap, a thoughtful look in her eyes, and the faint tension in her shoulders. He could sense the courage it had taken for her to face the mountain man, the honesty in the way she had recounted everything, and the strength she had shown throughout the ordeal. For Ethan, it was more than respect. It was a deep, quiet admiration. He found himself wanting to understand her, to know more about the person behind the habit, behind the calm voice, and behind the gentle demeanor. Mary Ann glanced at him, noticing the thoughtful expression on his face. For a moment she felt a little self-conscious, wondering what he was thinking. Then she reminded herself that he had been kind, patient, and professional. He had treated her with respect, listened to her story without judgment, and handled the situation with care. Slowly, she felt a sense of trust growing. She realized that Ethan was someone who could understand the challenges she faced, someone who could see her not just as a young nun, but as a person with fears, strengths, and dreams. After a few moments of quiet, Mary Ann spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Sheriff, I never expected the mountains to be so full of surprises," she said, a faint smile on her lips. Ethan looked up, returning her smile with a small, gentle nod. "Neither did I," he replied. "It's easy to think we know a place, but sometimes even the quietest town or the calmest forest can hold the unexpected." Mary Ann nodded, feeling a little lighter. Speaking about the day's events aloud made them feel less heavy, and sharing them with someone who understood brought comfort she hadn't anticipated. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. "You handled yourself well," he said. "Most people would have panicked, run, or made the situation worse. But you stayed calm, honest, and careful. That takes courage." Mary Ann felt her cheeks warm at his words. She had not thought of her actions as extraordinary. They had simply been necessary. But hearing Ethan acknowledge her courage made her feel seen, validated, and appreciated. It was a rare feeling, one she had not experienced often. Encouraged by his words, Mary Ann began to open up further. She spoke of her life before coming to Willow Creek, about why she had joined the convent, and about her desire to help others. She spoke of the quiet fulfillment she found in small acts of kindness, the satisfaction of seeing someone smile because of her help, and the deep sense of purpose her faith gave her. Ethan listened intently, asking gentle questions now and then to clarify details. His attention was focused and genuine, not casual or distracted. Mary Ann felt that he truly wanted to understand her story, her motivations, and her heart, As the conversation continued, the room grew quieter, and the outside world seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, sharing stories, thoughts, and reflections. Marianne realized that she was speaking more freely than she had with anyone in a long time. There was no judgment, no interruption, just listening and understanding. She felt a connection forming, not the kind of connection that could be rushed or forced, but one built on trust, shared humanity, and the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. Ethan, too, felt a shift inside himself. The day had been unusual, the events had been intense, but it was the moments like these, quiet, honest, and reflective, that stayed with him. He admired Marianne's courage, her honesty, and her gentle strength. He found himself drawn not just to her story, but to her presence. There was something rare about the way she carried herself. Someone who had faced fear, uncertainty, and challenges, yet remained calm, compassionate, and grounded. He realized that he wanted to know more, to be near someone who could inspire him in ways he hadn't realized he needed. Marianne's voice softened as she spoke about her time in the mountains that day. "When I walked through the forest, I felt both afraid and alive," she said. "There is something about nature, about being alone with your thoughts and your purpose, that makes you aware of everything at once, the fear, the beauty, the responsibility. It all comes together in a way that changes you." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, understanding exactly what she meant. "I think that's true for all of us," he said. "Sometimes life tests us in ways we don't expect, and sometimes it's those tests that help us see who we really are." Marianne paused, reflecting on his words. She realized that they were both thinking about more than just the events of the day. There was a shared understanding between them, a sense that life was fragile, unpredictable, and full of lessons that could only be learned in extraordinary moments. She felt gratitude for his presence, for his calmness, and for the way he had handled everything with care. And she felt a quiet curiosity about him. The experiences he had lived, the choices he had made, and the thoughts he rarely shared with anyone. As the night deepened, they continued to talk, moving from stories of their past to thoughts about the future. Marianne spoke about her hopes for the convent, for the people she cared for, and for herself. She spoke of dreams that seemed small to some but enormous to her, a life of service, compassion, and understanding. Ethan shared stories of his own life in the town, the quiet satisfaction of keeping people safe, and the loneliness that sometimes accompanied his duty. Both of them recognized the value of the other's perspective, and the conversation flowed easily, naturally, without the need for pretense or ceremony. Hours passed without them realizing it. Outside, the stars shone brightly, and the moon cast a soft glow across the quiet town. Inside the office, the lamp continued to illuminate their faces as they shared experiences, thoughts, and reflections. There was a growing sense of mutual respect, understanding, and even admiration. Marianne felt seen in a way she rarely had, and Ethan felt a sense of connection that he had not expected. They were two people from different worlds, brought together by circumstance, finding comfort and clarity in each other's company. Finally, Marianne yawned softly, realizing how late it had become. She smiled at Ethan, grateful for his patience and presence. "I should rest," she said gently. Ethan nodded, feeling a small pang of reluctance to let the night end. "Of course," he replied. "You've had a long day, and you deserve it. We can continue tomorrow if needed." Marianne thanked him, feeling a sense of calm settle over her. She knew that the events of the day were not over, that tomorrow would bring questions, reflections, and perhaps challenges. But for now, she could rest. As she prepared to leave the room, Ethan offered a small piece of advice. "Remember, courage isn't just in facing danger," he said softly. "It's also in honesty, in kindness, and in trusting yourself. You've shown all of that today." Marianne smiled, feeling the weight of his words. They were not just encouragement, they were recognition, understanding, and acknowledgement of her strength. She felt a quiet warmth spread through her, a sense of being seen, valued, and understood. Marianne returned to the small room where she would sleep, her mind filled with reflection, gratitude, and a sense of connection. She thought about the mountain man, the mountains, and the day's events. She also thought about Ethan, his calm presence, and the bond that had begun to form between them. It was a night unlike any other, a night of revelation, trust, and human connection. She knew that the experiences of the day would stay with her forever, shaping the way she saw herself, others, and the world around her. As the first light of dawn crept over the mountains, Marianne drifted into sleep, her heart still carrying the echoes of the night's conversation. Outside, Willow Creek remained quiet, unaware of the extraordinary events that had unfolded within the sheriff's office. Inside, two people had discovered courage, honesty, and connection in the midst of uncertainty, a bond that would shape the days to come and leave a lasting mark on their lives. The next morning in Willow Creek was calm, with sunlight spilling gently across the rooftops and glinting on the frozen streams that ran through the town. Birds chirped softly, announcing the new day, and the townsfolk began their usual routines. Despite the peaceful appearance, the events of the previous day still lingered in the minds of a few. The encounter in the mountains had already started to ripple through the town in whispers, though the full story was not yet known. Inside the sheriff's office, however, the atmosphere was quiet and focused, as Sheriff Ethan Cole prepared to continue his work of documenting the events and ensuring that everything was handled properly.
Sister Marianne had spent the night reflecting on the extraordinary day she had experienced.
She thought about the encounter with the mountain man, about the courage she had discovered within herself, and about the trust that had begun to form between her and Sheriff Ethan. Even though she had faced fear and uncertainty, she also realized that her strength and honesty had guided her through the situation. She understood that life sometimes placed people in unexpected circumstances, testing them in ways they could not predict. But she also knew that those moments could reveal the deepest parts of one's character. As Marianne prepared to speak with Ethan again, she felt a sense of resolve. She wanted to ensure that the events were understood clearly, that there would be no misunderstanding, and that the mountain man's story was considered. She also wanted to maintain the honesty and openness that had grown between her and Ethan. The bond they had formed the previous night had been unexpected, but she realized that it was real, a connection built on shared experiences, trust, and understanding. Ethan greeted her with a calm smile, noticing the confidence in her posture and the thoughtful look in her eyes. "Good morning, Sister Marianne," he said. "I hope you were able to rest. We have some work to do, but I also want to make sure you're all right." Marianne nodded, feeling a quiet gratitude for his attention. "Good morning, Sheriff. Yes, I rested. Thank you. I feel ready to continue," she replied, her voice steady but soft. She carried the same calm strength that had helped her navigate the mountains, and Ethan felt a renewed sense of admiration. They began by reviewing the events of the previous day. Ethan carefully documented every detail Marianne could recall, asking questions to ensure that the timeline was clear and accurate. Marianne answered honestly and thoughtfully, describing the forest, the mountain man, and her actions with clarity. She emphasized that she had acted with care, courage, and respect, and that her only intention had been to protect herself while fulfilling her duty to gather herbs for the convent. Ethan listened carefully, taking notes and asking follow-up questions when necessary. As the discussion continued, Ethan considered the mountain man's perspective. He recognized that while Marianne had acted correctly and honestly, it was also important to understand why the mountain man had reacted as he did. Ethan planned to visit him in the mountains soon, not as an authority figure seeking punishment, but as someone seeking understanding. He believed that fairness required listening to all sides, and that justice was not only about rules, but also about compassion and empathy. Marianne appreciated Ethan's careful approach, noting that he had a rare ability to balance duty with humanity. By mid-morning, they concluded the formal review and began preparing for the next steps. Ethan explained that he would speak to a few townspeople who had knowledge of the mountain man and would also investigate any recent activity in the forest. Marianne agreed to accompany him part way, both for safety and to provide additional context. As they walked toward the edge of town, the quiet streets of Willow Creek seemed peaceful, but both knew that the events of the previous day had already started to change the town, the lives of those involved, and even their own understanding of courage and trust. Along the way, Marianne and Ethan spoke quietly about their reflections. Marianne admitted that she had never expected the events of the mountains to lead to such self-discovery. She realized that courage was not only about facing danger, but also about honesty, integrity, and responsibility. She also acknowledged the comfort she had found in sharing her experiences with someone who truly listened, someone who saw beyond appearances to understand the person within. Ethan, in turn, reflected on the value of empathy, patience, and open-mindedness. He recognized that the trust he had developed with Marianne was rare and meaningful. When they reached the outskirts of the town, Ethan paused to point out some of the paths leading into the forest. "These paths are tricky," he said. "Even someone familiar with the mountains can get lost if they're not careful. But it's clear that you handled yourself well yesterday. Your caution and awareness made all the difference."
Marianne smiled faintly. "I think the mountains teach you a lot about yourself," she said.
"You realize that fear is natural, but courage comes from knowing when to act, how to act, and when to be honest about your intentions." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, impressed by her insight. As the day went on, Ethan continued his investigation, speaking with locals and reviewing the surroundings. Marianne returned to the convent, carrying her basket of herbs, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the mountains, the mountain man, and the connection she felt with Ethan. She realized that the events had changed her perspective on life, courage, and trust. She also felt a quiet hope that the bond she had formed with Ethan could grow, even within the boundaries of their responsibilities and the expectations of the town. By evening, the investigation had progressed, and it became clear that Marianne's actions were entirely understandable and justified. The mountain man had not been seriously harmed and had retreated deeper into the forest, leaving no lasting conflict. The town began to accept the story as it had been told, and the sense of tension gradually eased. Marianne felt a wave of relief, knowing that the events of the mountains were now understood and that she had acted with honesty, courage, and respect throughout. That night, Marianne found herself thinking about Ethan again. She remembered the calm presence he had shown, the thoughtful questions, and the quiet support he had offered. She realized that the night they had shared in conversation had created a bond neither could ignore. It was not a fleeting feeling, but a recognition of trust, respect, and mutual understanding. Marianne felt a sense of gratitude for his presence in her life, and for the way he had guided her through an extraordinary situation. Ethan, too, reflected on the events of the past 2 days. He thought about Marianne's courage, honesty, and gentle strength. He recognized that their encounter had given him a new perspective, not only on his work as sheriff, but also on the value of human connection. He felt a growing admiration for her and an awareness that trust and understanding could emerge in the most unexpected ways. He knew that while the world might impose rules and expectations, the bond they shared was real, meaningful, and worth honoring. Over the next few days, life in Willow Creek slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Marianne continued her work at the convent, caring for the sick, teaching the children, and assisting wherever she was needed. Ethan resumed his duties as sheriff, maintaining order and protecting the town. Yet both carried with them the lessons and experiences of the mountains, the quiet moments of reflection, and the bond that had formed between them. There was a subtle, unspoken understanding that life had changed in ways they could not fully articulate, but that they both felt deeply. As time passed, Marianne found herself more confident in her work, her decisions, and her interactions with the townsfolk. She realized that courage and honesty were qualities that could guide her through any challenge, no matter how unexpected. She also understood that connection with another person, someone who listens, understands, and respects, was a powerful force. For Ethan, the experience reinforced the importance of empathy, careful judgment, and patience. He recognized that leadership was not only about enforcing rules, but also about understanding the hearts of the people he served. In the quiet evenings, Marianne and Ethan would occasionally meet, speaking briefly about the town, the mountains, or the simple moments of life. There was a sense of comfort in their conversations, a recognition of shared experience, and a growing trust that neither took lightly. While they respected their responsibilities, they also recognized that the extraordinary events of the mountains had created a connection that could endure. It was a bond built on courage, honesty, empathy, and shared humanity. In the end, the mountains had taught Marianne and Ethan lessons they would never forget. Marianne discovered that courage was about more than facing fear. It was about honesty, integrity, and trust in oneself. Ethan realized that leadership required compassion, patience, and understanding. Together, they had faced extraordinary circumstances, navigated challenges with care and respect, and discovered a bond that went beyond the ordinary. The town of Willow Creek continued its quiet, peaceful life, but for Marianne and Ethan, the events of the mountains would remain a defining moment, a story of courage, connection, and the quiet power of human understanding. And as the sun set once again over Willow Creek, casting golden light on the town and the mountains beyond, both Marianne and Ethan felt a sense of hope, reflection, and anticipation for what the future might hold. The mountains had tested them, life had challenged them, and together they had discovered strength, trust, and a connection that would guide them in the days to come.